You know, when a child suddenly cuts off a parent, the whole conversation can get really messy really fast. It gets stuck in controversy and debate. But what if we could just move past all that? Today, we're going to dig into the modern science that helps explain this kind of family trauma. We're not talking about some disputed syndrome, but a real, recognized pathology that messes with our most basic human bonding system. Okay, let's get into it.
So at the very heart of all this is something that's just deeply unsettling. It's the complete and sudden rejection of a parent that a child once loved. It's a psychological mystery, really, and it's one that absolutely demands a clear explanation.
This is the question, right? And we're not talking about a moody teenager or a kid who's mad for a week. We are talking about a total, absolute shutdown of the relationship, an erasure of a bond. And figuring out the why behind this is absolutely critical for everyone involved.
To get to the real answer, we first have to update our thinking. On the left, you see the old idea from the 80s, parental alienation syndrome, or PAS. It was mostly based on anecdotes, and you know what? Mainstream psychology rejected it. But on the right, that's the modern scientific model, attachment-based parental alienation. And this isn't some newfangled syndrome. It's an explanation built on a rock-solid foundation of established psychology.
So how does this modern model actually work? Well, it all starts by looking at the most powerful motivational system in the entire human brain, our attachment system. And this isn't just about warm, fuzzy feelings. This is about survival. Attachment theory, at its core, tells us that a kid's brain is literally hardwired to bond with their parents. This drive is so strong that even kids with abusive parents usually form some kind of bond. They don't just sever the connection completely. Why? Because their survival instinct is screaming at them to stay close.
And this quote just nails it. For a child to completely shut down that primary survival drive, to just turn it off like a light switch toward a parent they loved, that's a major red flag. It's not a normal response. It's a signal that something inside that child's mind has been severely reorganized.
Okay, so how do you actually identify this? Well, the modern model gives us 3 specific things to look for. First, the child completely suppresses their bond with a perfectly normal, loving parent. Second, the child starts showing narcissistic traits like grandiosity, entitlement, a shocking lack of empathy. And third, and this is a big one, they share a persecutory delusion with the other parent, a totally false belief that the targeted parent is somehow evil or dangerous.
This psychological rewiring, it's not just happening in the abstract. It has real, measurable, biological consequences. This trauma is literally changing the physical structure of the child's developing brain through something we call toxic stress.
So, toxic stress. It's not the stress you feel before a test. Think of it like your body's fire alarm is blaring 24/7, with no way to turn it off and no supportive adult there to help. That constant, unrelenting stress literally starts to break down the architecture of the brain while it's still being built. And we can see this in the data. Check this out. When researchers measure cortisol, the main stress hormone, in kids exposed to this stuff, their systems are completely out of whack. A staggering 63% show a blunted response. That means their stress system is so worn out, it's pretty much just shut down. That's a classic hallmark of toxic stress. And this hormonal chaos actually changes the brain's wiring. The fear center, the amygdala, goes into overdrive, making tons of connections. Meanwhile, the part of the brain responsible for reasoning and seeing nuance, the prefrontal cortex, gets weaker. And the result of that? The child literally loses the ability to see gray areas. Their thinking becomes rigid, black and white, good versus evil, safe versus dangerous. So you have to be asking, where does this all come from? I mean, this kind of severe pathology doesn't just pop up out of nowhere in a child. The research is very clear that it's driven by the psychology of the parent the child is still aligned with. Yeah, the source material points directly to the personality issues of that allied parent. Often this parent has their own narcissistic or borderline traits. The stress of a divorce can then trigger their own unresolved childhood trauma, and the child basically becomes a pawn, a tool for that parent's own emotional regulation. This table breaks it down perfectly. A defense mechanism in the parent called splitting is what creates that all good versus all bad parent story for the child. The parent's own intense fear of abandonment is what drives them to isolate the child, and a fundamental lack of empathy means their own emotional needs always come before their child's well-being. Okay, so understanding the problem is one thing. Fixing it is a whole other ballgame. The path to helping these families requires a super precise diagnosis and really specialized interventions because getting it wrong can actually do more harm than good.
The first and maybe most critical step is telling the difference between alienation and what's called realistic estrangement. On the right, estrangement is a justified rejection. There's a real history of abuse or neglect, and even then, the child often has mixed feelings, love mixed in with the fear and anger. But on the left, with alienation, the rejection is unjustified. The child is rigid, cold, and has zero mixed feelings about a parent they used to have a great relationship with.
And this is why just sending everyone to traditional family therapy so often fails, and can even be a disaster. It's just not effective as long as the child is still living in that pathogenic environment. It's way too slow for such a severe problem, and honestly, it can end up making things worse by focusing on the wrong things, like restoring authority instead of repairing the actual relationship.
So what does work? Well, effective programs are intensive. They're highly structured. It's not about just getting everyone in a room to talk. First, they actually teach the child about how memory can be distorted. Then, they carefully reintroduce the targeted parent in short, positive, structured ways. And crucially, they coach that parent on how to respond. But the foundation for all of it? A temporary, protective break from the alienating parent's influence to give the child's brain the space it desperately needs to reset.
And the stakes here, they couldn't be higher. This is not some childhood problem that kids just get over. The long-term data is clear. 70% of adults who went through this as children go on to suffer from depression. 70%. Not to mention higher rates of substance abuse and major problems in their own relationships down the line.
And all of that leaves us with this final, really critical question. We've seen that this is a form of severe psychological abuse that actually rewires a child's brain. So the challenge for our legal system, for our mental health systems, is to figure out how we shift from just offering therapy to providing real structural protection for a child whose mind has literally become a battleground.